Hello and welcome to Off the Track. Thank you for joining us for our second part of our pit display discussion. So today we'll be focusing on all things pit display construction. And today I'm joined by Ben Gallen,
Howdy.
George Stoner,
Hi.
Matthew Fleming,
Hello.
and Peter Russell.
Hello.
So the two main elements of your pit display construction is the paneling and the framework. So today we'll be beginning with the panels, and I guess starting with what's become an extremely popular and common option used by teams is the core flute.
We stayed away from it because the issue with core flute is there's a very clear grain where the core flute itself bends, and this can also make it an issue to transport. Despite being light, you really don't want it being bent, so we tried to stay away from core flute.
It also has a bit of a texture to it as well that
Yeah.
it's not the prettiest of material, but it is light and I guess fairly cheap considering every political candidate ever has used it.
Another option for teams is, of course, a composite board. So we, as IOTA, chose this as our World Finals pit display material for all of our panel work. So in essence, it is a sandwich of two really thin aluminium sheets, which are sandwiched a really light plastic or polymer composite between it. It could be made from recycled polymers, or it really depends on the brand you go with. And for us, we then applied vinyl graphics to the flat white surface. We found it really, 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 oh God. We found it to be a really good choice of materials. It was pretty light, it was really strong, you didn't have the bending issues or folding issues that you can experience with core flute. It's certainly not one of the cheaper options. We were lucky to be able to use a lot of, not necessarily scrap material, but material that was too small for certain jobs for our supplier. He was then able to apply it for the more minor or technical details, which saved us a bit of money because he didn't have a formal use for it in the first place. Ben, I believe you use some form of a PVC foam board. Would you like to talk about that, please?
Yeah, so we use a PVC foam board, and basically what that is it's this very smooth and flat, hard surface that you'll be able to get printed on directly. I think it's laser printed on from memory. And it's a tiny bit more expensive than core flute. However, I think the benefits majorly outweigh the cost. It can be a little painful to transport as well, but hey, worked for us.
There is the one issue with it, which is it is a bit fragile around the edges. It's known to snap if you drop it. Your corners might snap off a bit. You can glue them back on, but they'll never look the same. So you do have to be a bit careful with the edges, maybe put some foam pieces or whatever, like what they do with mirrors, just to protect the edges.
Okay, so it's taken the printability and maybe not price, but and then improved the surface finish, but sacrifices by becoming slightly more brittle. So extra consideration needed for packing by teams. Next up for mention is the use of timber paneling. So, say for IOTA, for our state and nationals booth, we had used essentially a form of MDF, which is great for internal competitions, but with international biosecurity laws, to use it for an international competition with Australia's biosecurity laws would have been an absolute nightmare. So we ended up straying away from that. And it's also extremely heavy.
With that timber, you'd ultimately have to check with your country's local rules and whatever country you are going to's laws, both of their biosecurity laws, because you got to get it there, and you probably want to get it back. You probably don't want to just chuck it out. So check both of them. For us, it was always timber was a big concern, but for your country, it may be something different.
Our next panel material of note is quite a contentious one. It's the fabric banners. So we were certainly looking into them. They're extremely cheap in comparison to a lot of materials, and a lot more portable, as you can clearly fold them down or roll them down. But Peter, do you want to take us through some advantages and disadvantages of them?
Yeah, so fabric banners, they are, as you said, Corey, they're really cheap, really cheap. I'm not sure how cheap they are, but they are, it's probably the cheapest option out of the ones that we've discussed. And yeah, they're very, very versatile. You can take them anywhere. The only sort of disadvantage, I'd say, is that you have to make sure when you're putting them up that they are stretched out sufficiently so that you don't get any creases across the fabric. Otherwise, it starts to look a little bit tacky, and it's quite obvious that you've used fabric as your material. But apart from that, they're a great, cost-effective way for panels to use panels. So yeah, they're probably great for regionals and state competitions.
Yeah, so we were discussing this beforehand in the prep for this podcast, and we found that if you are considering using a fabric banner for, say, your back wall or your side panels, make sure you have some form of method to apply extra tension across this. So it might be a crossbar that can wind out and pull the fabric taut, say, in the event, or have backup pieces in the event that, say, one of your back verticals may be damaged or bent slightly in shipping, for example, which does happen. Shipping is not a perfect industry. They do their best, but things happen. And so having backup options to ensure that you have a pit that looks as good as it does when you first set it up at school, or if you're having it externally produced, how good they have looking in their showrooms. Anyone else have anything to offer for panel considerations?
Basic poster material. That's another thing we used very, very, very early on in the competition. Is we just get print from Officeworks, because back when pit display marks weren't worth as much in the Australian competition, and when we were just a small team with a very, very small budget, we actually opted to just get our stuff printed at a local Officeworks as opposed to getting it professionally printed elsewhere. And this just saved us quite a few costs and also transportation problems because it comes rolled up.
Okay, so I assume you applied double-sided Velcro? Would I be correct in guessing that?
Yep.
So you could just apply it to the sort of felt backings that are provided at the Australian events for the dedicated pit zones.
Obviously, the issue with a fabric banner is it will have creases and things in it if you don't tension it correctly. So you're going to need to, if you want it to look good, you're going to need to work out some way to actually ensure that it is as tight as you can possibly go, to ensure that it's got a flat surface. Otherwise, it might not look the best.
Could you iron it?
I don't think so. It's paper.
Oh, you're talking.
You
I
said
thought you were
fabric.
actual fabric.
Yeah.
Did I?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I meant paper banners. Yeah, okay.
That's right. You get the point.
For our World's Pit Display, for our back panels, we printed onto quite a sort of heavy PVC, I think it was PVC banner. So they were rolled up, but because it was quite a heavy material, it wouldn't really crease too much, and it would look sort of rigid enough that you wouldn't see creases on them.
Right. Was that sort of maybe like a thinner version of the foam board that we used? Ours definitely didn't roll up, but
Yeah, no.
I mean, it was like a single layer of material, but it was we could roll it up. I mean, we chose it because it was easy to transport in a small size.
Okay.
Oh, that's absolutely brilliant.
Anything like that?
Yeah, I was going to say I never came across anything of that sort.
Maybe we don't have that. Maybe we don't have that kind of thing in Australia, but might be a thing in the UK.
Worth teams chasing that up, especially for international competitions. That is absolutely brilliant. How expensive was that, George? And was it easy to find a producer for that as well?
I'm not quite sure how expensive it was because we had our entire pit display. We worked with a company who sponsored us, so I don't have any figures for what each part would have costed us.
Okay.
I don't think it would have been too expensive to get printed. I mean, it would have been more expensive than getting it printed on like paper, but I think it would probably be cheaper than getting it printed on board. But we were working with a specialist sort of display booth company to produce our pit display.
Yeah, because that to me seems like the ultimate combination of all the different positives of all the different materials that we've just discussed. You said you've got the rigidity when stretched out of, say, the PVC, but with the transportability of a fabric, or nearly akin to a fabric banner, and the price range, say, somewhere in the middle possibly. Sounds absolutely fantastic.
And because it's not flexible, it's probably not going to snap on the edges either.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't totally rigid, but the way it hung, it wouldn't crease. It looked good enough. And actually, I think we did notice that once we took it back home, the corners around the edges, it would begin to snap slightly rather than tear. It would. Some parts around the outside would snap off because it was still a plastic material. But it was, for the competition, it was easily tough enough.
Okay, now we'll transition into different frame choices. Now, I guess especially at a World Finals event, the aluminium connected style frame systems have become extremely popular, used by teams all across the world. Ben, do you want to talk to us about your experiences with this system?
Yeah, so I don't think we've actually had pit display other than, of course, development class where we haven't used the connected style sort of stuff. And it's very cheap and very malleable, which is a good thing if you're looking to do quite interesting shapes. However, my major issue is transporting it. We had a lot of pieces snap during transportation, so take plenty of spare corners, and you'll also need quite a lot of it. So we sourced ours from a local Bunnings, and we actually had to buy up, I think, 2 or 3 stores worth of their current supply. So
wow.
Yeah, make sure you've got the stock for it, and make sure it's transported properly.
Okay. We used a very similar system, except we had ours manufactured externally, and we found pricing in comparison to other sort of similar systems, it was pretty good. It's certainly not cheap, especially if you do end up with the branded connected style pieces.
Yeah, for Infinitude, we used the aluminium connectors as well as an aluminium tubing sort of framing, and that worked really, really well for us because it's light, simple to put together, very, very quick to put together, well within the 2-hour time limit, and it is very durable, and it can support all the everything we put on top of it. It could support all of that weight really well. And what we did to assist in putting it together was labeling all the parts, like A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, all the way to L. And then we had a little manual, and then, people could put stuff together, and we assigned people to, right, you put this bit together, you put this bit together. But we're going to talk about that more, I think, in a bit. But yeah, we used the aluminium tubing as well as the connectors. And yeah, that was really, really good for us.
Okay, just to recap on that, pretty good price to performance, really light. You can end up with quite a few pieces, so make sure you can source it, and make sure you bring spare connectors to the event in the case of breakage.
And file off your edges so you don't cut yourself while you're building
Yes. Yes.
So what we did with our pit display was a bit different. So rather than having a structural frame and then visual panels on the outside, which were supported by the structural frame, we used a system where it was all sort of more one part. So what we had a cardboard structure that was loads of sheets of corrugated cardboard that slotted together. And then there was a larger outer piece, which was printed and had our visuals on, which sort of held the whole thing together. I mean, if you look at our Evolve social Instagram page, I think on the 7th of November, you can see a video of us assembling one of our practice pieces, which just shows how it all slots together. And I think the advantage of this was that for us, it meant that we could have a very lightweight pit display that would pack down into a very small size. And it was basically sort of a flat pack IKEA pit display. And we found it pretty useful for saving size, and it meant that we could fit all of the table structure of our pit display in what was small enough to carry onto an airplane with us.
Wow, that's amazing. And for a final mention of our frame discussion, timber, as mentioned before, make sure it's in compliance with your country's and international biosecurity laws. Can be great for internal competitions for state and nationals, can be really cheap. A lot of teams find that they're able to better produce it on their own if they're not familiar with working with the aluminium or monocoque systems. But yeah, make sure it works for you. Do your research. Our next topic is the major decision to either do it yourself or to outsource the manufacturing of your pit display. So this essentially comes down to, as with many elements with this competition, quality, price, and timing. So, quality. So a lot of teams, especially within Australia, have had experiences, say, on a development team, of producing their own pit display. And for the majority of teams, this is the classic trestle table and posters. When you step up into professional, unless done really, really well, this may not be in line with the quality of competition that's being produced by other teams. So this leads the question to a lot of teams: do they outsource to potentially increase their quality of pit display to a professional company that has potentially years of industry experience, or do they go along the lines of researching and developing their own quality pit display and producing that themselves? So the decision to DIY your pit display or to outsource your pit display is quite often influenced by the price. So how much financial capital you are prepared to allocate towards pit display. So a lot of the time, and I know we found it certainly for IOTA, getting quotes by external industry pit display manufacturers or producers, they can be quite high. We certainly had quotes in the range between $10,000 right the way through to $50,000, with companies almost insisting that they actually had to not manufacture, but assemble the pit display at our event, which we thought was a bit different.
50,000? You could get your house renovated for that.
Yeah, literally. We were quite taken aback by that. It was well, down in Sydney, we went around all the different trade display manufacturers, one of which actually ended up being just across the road from REA, as we found out, with their new headquarters. And yeah, so a wide variety of different pricings. We ended up with a local manufacturer. He was far cheaper and far more willing to work with us than a lot of these large style companies that are doing, as I say, jobs in the range of $50,000 for major companies such as Google. I remember walking into one of the warehouses and just looking around, and they had all these pit displays ready and packed up to be shipped out from Google and all these other massive companies, which was really cool to see. There was some stuff there that hadn't formally been announced at the time. It's now out. It's Google Cloud. But those pits were being used for the actual initial announcement of that. It then comes into the two other major considerations, as Ethel mentioned. So the quality and the time. So for teams with little experience or coming from schools such as us, which had no experience producing this industry-style booth, our hand was somewhat forced with the decision to outsource. But it also comes into the amount of time that you're prepared to allocate towards the pit display.
So
Yep.
there are
Yep.
risks, obviously, to be considered when you outsource a pit display, in both quality and time. So although again, an industry, a company that will actually build a trade display would probably have a better idea of what to do, you also don't have complete control over the actual quality of the design. Well, the quality, they'd probably do good quality, but you don't have control over you don't have complete control over the finish of it, and they might not know everything about F1 in schools, so they might not do some things the right way. You know, maybe you want a shelf for your car, and they don't make it the right size, that kind of thing. If you did that yourself, you'd have the complete control. If you got someone else to do it, you need to be a bit more concerned and make sure they do it right. And that again brings into time. Like, you know, they might not even get it done on time, and then you've got a problem. So there are risks always with outsourcing that you need to consider and have backup plans in case things go wrong.
I think furthering your point about the risk of quality with outsourcing, I think it's really important that if you do outsource, that you try and create a good working relationship with whoever's manufacturing your pit display. So with the company Speed Screen that we worked with, they're about an hour's drive from us. So a couple of times we went down after they put together our mock pit display from our initial designs, and we took our screens and we took our portfolios and we took our cars just to check that everything fitted into the slots it was meant to. And also we could just look at the pit display and stand in front of it and see whether it actually felt like it was the right dimensions, or whether we would need to change anything on the design, maybe like if the table was too high or too low. So I think relationships like that are really important to build to ensure that you get the pit display that you want.
Yeah, if you just hand it off and assume it's going to get done, you're going to have some problems.
Yeah, we certainly aim to create a really good relationship with our manufacturer. It was a local company, and it was about a 5-minute drive from school, which was fantastic. He was essentially doing us a favour. While he was still charging, in essence, he was producing our pit display on top of the workload that he already had. And as a result, in a lot of times it was pushed back, and ended up picking it up the morning of. We packed it down at 1 a.m. the morning of that I had to be driven to Sydney to be put on the plane and taken across to Singapore. But having that working relationship, as George mentioned, you know, we were able to go down during even potentially lunch breaks, I think, sometimes. And he'd call us up and ask us to come down, check some things. We'd, as you say, bring some props, portfolios, cars, making sure it was all coming together nicely. And then towards the end, just making sure that everything was done right. He was able to show us all the tips and tricks and how he thought it would be best for us to assemble/disassemble it. And yeah, all of that extra detail and information and understanding coming through building that working relationship, as George mentioned.
So we always built our pit displays by ourselves and within the school itself. So basically, leading up to a competition, we would have an entire room sanctioned off where we would just be constructing the pit display within our free periods, after school, before school, when we had a chance, really. It can be a good experience constructing a pit display by yourself, because you also then understand that you have, like, everything works the way you want it to. It's shaped the way you want it to be, and you get a better understanding of the pit display itself. However,
you also know what to do if something goes wrong.
True. And also, fat money save. But the issues that can arise from constructing a pit display yourself, I know we had quite a few problems, to say the least, from building a pit display ourselves, which I think is pretty fair to be expected. considering none of us are architects, at least from what I know of. I don't know if any of you guys have an architecture degree, but I certainly don't.
I just missed out on that.
So problems was that to was this like structural rigidity problems or aesthetics, or where'd you run into those difficulties?
A lot of it was breaking pieces and then making pieces too long and not calculating it the right size. And then also having a mentor that told us anything we did was impossible, and then we did anyways, and it worked. So it just rose a lot of issues not having, that sort of professional opinion on structure.
And then, in hindsight, with the amount of time that you as a team had to sink into that project element, if you did it again, would you consider potentially outsourcing it to save that time?
I'm not sure, because building the pit display, I think, was a worthwhile experience, and it did give me a lot of control over the element. However, I think if I were to give it another shot, I'd be going for absolute perfection. I think with that would be outsourcing.
And one thing also is you don't have to completely outsource the whole thing. You can do some things internally and some things externally. Like everyone does outsourcing to some degree because they get their posters done and all the printing done. So it's more of how much outsourcing do you want to do than do you want to outsource.
Yeah. And I mean, the Ascension Pit Display is a fantastic example of pit displays within this competition, but do you have a rough estimate on how much that ended up costing you, considering you did it yourself?
I think it was actually sub $2,000.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah.
I'd have to check the portfolio again, but I think it was on a price range of maybe $5,000 at max.
So still pretty cheap.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll just quickly check the portfolio, double check that actually, because I'm not 100% sure on cost anymore.
And I suppose that ties back into the point I made earlier. So for us, our school had no experience, but of course for Mountain View High School, you've had teams there building pit displays for years, and a lot of experience with teachers and yourself and past students of do's and don'ts.
Yeah. So we had an initial budget of $3,000 for our pit display, and it actually came under to about $2,700.
All right, that's really cheap.
Yeah, I'd recommend it if you have cost saving issues, but if you've got the money, just outsource it.
Okay, our next topic is the benefits that can be gained through using CAD to internally design your pit display. So if you're considering outsourcing, it's of course really good to take potentially renders or videos or CAD models to your external company and show them what you are really looking for in a pit. You may take several different designs and they may actually send you back. I know we had companies send back appropriations of our designs and what they thought would work, and applying their industry knowledge of these trade displays, which, even though we didn't necessarily go with all of them, clearly only with one, just being able to take away their interpretations of what would be best and then include elements in our final pit display was a really good part of our design development, which of course is required for your portfolio. Did anyone else have something similar to that with their design development with external companies, or is it all internal with CAD work?
Well, I mean, even if you're going to DIY the pit display, you should do a CAD model. And even drawings, so that you've got drawings there, so you know exactly each component you need to produce to the millimeter, so you aren't just winging it, which always results in problems.
Yeah, we did CAD designs as well, and I think it's just a good way to iterate concepts really, really quickly instead of having to, physically build it out. You can get a real representation, computer generated render, within a day. Like our pit display guy, he'd go home, do a few designs, and then come back the next day and go, right, what do you think of this? So it's a really good and quick way. And you can show it within your portfolio as well to show, right, we do have, we have progressed our design. We haven't just, dreamt it up.
Yeah. Yeah, I was about to say that. Even though we completely did ours by ourselves, we still had multiple renditions of CAD models. And I think apart from the obvious of it being in the portfolio, being like another thing to visualize, I think another major bonus is it's another use of CAD. And I think going back to the heart of the competition and the learning experiences that you can gain from it, CAD is a major part of this competition that isn't part of traditional learning, and I think should take advantage of that.
Absolutely.
Peter, yeah, I'll pick up on one of the points that you made there, Peter, with CAD being a great way to virtually represent your booth, which, of course, if you are competing at a virtual final, will be how you are presenting your booth to the judges. So this may be in the form of renders, as you mentioned, or we've certainly seen some teams pick up some really creative animation styles to represent their booth.
I think it's going to be, this is something we haven't really seen before, having, teams are actually having to be mandated to make renders and videos. Obviously for the World Finals, we don't know what the requirements will be yet, but I'm pretty sure in Australia, I can't quite remember, someone correct me, do they have to make a video for their pit display?
Yeah, I think they've got to do a render from memory.
Okay. So it doesn't have to be a fly-through animated video, or is it just a picture, do we think?
Oh, I meant video render. Yeah.
Oh, okay, got it. Right. Yeah, so that will be very interesting. And I think there's a time limit on that. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how teams sort of, how they hit the maximum points without actually having a physical booth is going to be quite interesting to see.
Yeah.
So this leads us into our other major considerations. The first of which is the portability or the shipping of your pit displays. Is it pit display? That's what we're calling it, isn't it?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Yep. So there, especially for the international competition, there is widespread debate over the advantages and disadvantages of carry-on style pit displays, where the pit can break down into small enough components that can be loaded into your personal luggage as a team, or in slightly larger boxes that can still be classed as additional baggage, versus full-blown international shipping, crates, pallets, massive boxes, the whole works. Can everyone take us through their experiences, if they had anything?
We had like 7 boxes. We had the aluminium frame system with posters and things, but it got a bit messy. We had I think it was 7 boxes we had to ship. Various sizes. Don't do that.
Yeah, we had too many boxes. I think it must have been 8 or 10. I'm thinking it was a ridiculous amount. In Australia, we're lucky to have a national sponsor for shipping, who we took up their services, but they would only ship a certain amount, so we ended up having to use 2 different shipping companies, and that was an absolute nightmare to deal with.
They shipped all of ours, but I think they must have changed. I think they changed their regulations our year, because they did actually ship all of ours, and we had like 7 boxes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they changed it because of Peter.
Yeah, probably. It was such a nightmare to deal with, especially when you're dealing with, you're dealing with REA, you're dealing with F1 in schools, the freight forwarder, the freight company themselves. There's so many different people to deal with. And then you've got to meet all of the different regulations for the countries, and it's just a nightmare to handle. So if you can reduce how many boxes your stuff goes in, definitely do that, and don't use too many boxes if you can help it.
Yeah, and I also remember when ours arrived like 2 weeks early somehow. So we actually had to pay for storage with the handlers on the Malaysian side.
And obviously,
that was
the
a
more
couple
boxes,
grand, I think.
yeah, and obviously, the more boxes you have, the more it's going to cost. So yeah, definitely try to minimize your shipping.
Yeah. Mine was a completely different experience because we had carry-on.
Oh.
So our entire pit display would fold down and we would be able to take it onto a plane. So it was designed that way to increase transportability because that was also a regulation ad for our World Finals. So ours worked as sort of like a scissor system where certain bits would fold out and there were a lot of X joints. So it'd be almost like a piano accordion. And ours folded up into little, I think they were surfboard bags, funny enough, because that's one of the things that you're allowed to transport over planes, and that's how they work with sizes. So we got a bunch of those, transported our pit display. I think it costed like $900 to transport it all over there.
Which, I mean, all things considered for international shipping for a reasonably large trade display, that's quite economical.
Yeah. However, because it wasn't exactly a shipping company, I think there was less care taken on our pit display, which is where a couple of the broken joints probably came from. So, minor issue there, but it's fine.
We went for a similar sort of system of carry-on because we wanted to save money as well as just sort of ensuring that if it's traveling with us, we kind of know where it is. So what we did was, as I explained earlier, our cardboard system managed to pack down into quite a small box. So we had one box which counted as its own suitcase, which was it was a really big box. It was big enough that we actually had to take everything out of the box to have it swabbed for drugs and explosives.
Wow.
Which was an interesting experience because it wouldn't fit through the oversized scanner. It was within their limits for what they'd take on the plane, but it wouldn't fit through their scanner, which meant we turned up, rather than the nice neat cardboard box which we set off with, we turned up with this thing that was sort of held together with loads of duct tape. And then we had another box which had all of our cars and portfolios to go on the pit display, which we just put in one of our suitcases, which actually meant that we spent very little on shipping. I think we spent $60 in total.
Brilliant. And that brings up a very, very interesting and very important debate of packaging. So how you choose to package all of your pit display components for shipping, especially international shipping of whichever method as just mentioned. So a lot of teams now having to opt for the heavy cardboard, so double or if not even triple wall cardboard. I know we certainly used that for IOTA and it was brilliant. Peter, you're nodding your head there. You want to expand on that?
Yeah, we use our freight company told us you have to use triple walled, and amazingly, one of our boxes actually got pierced through.
Oh wow!
Which I was very surprised. So yeah, even if you have triple walled, and if you haven't seen triple walled it's so thick, like it's crazy. You'd think how would anything penetrate that? Yeah, no, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous how thick it is. But yeah, amazingly, we had our boxes pierced. So yeah, take every precaution you can take.
Yeah, make sure you bubble wrap everything on the inside as well. Make sure, and things like vinyl wrapping. I know we certainly made a very conscious effort to make sure that we didn't have two vinyl surfaces in contact or a vinyl surface and say some sharper steel edge, because otherwise you will completely destroy your graphics and you will not have a pit looking like anything when you put it on the plane. So yeah, make sure you pack it as tight and as protective as you possibly can.
Also, as we're talking about breakages and that sort of thing, we had a few episodes ago, we had Lawrence from Centurion Racing on, and he actually said that he had a few different contingencies as well. So they had planned for, everything sort of going catastrophically wrong. And the example he gave was, if we had our merchandise missing. If it went missing, then we could actually go to somewhere in Abu Dhabi and, buy some. So definitely make sure you have contingencies in place if something breaks, or if, you lose something, that you can actually put something in its place. And what we did for the thing that broke, we had a bit of nail polish that actually allowed us to colour in the purple on our pit display. So that's what we used. But yeah, make sure
Like
you
the
definitely
car.
have a backup plan. Yeah.
Ah, cute.
Okay, and that ties into, of course, as we've mentioned throughout this podcast, risks of international shipping. So, as we just mentioned, say with vinyl or posted elements, your damage, scratching, make sure you've got everything nice and separated, partitions between it, bubble wrap, cardboard, whatever it may be. If you're using fabric, use some form of system, potentially a roller, to decrease the amount of creasing of fabric elements or potential stretching. And especially if you're traveling into areas which have a very, very different heat or humidity climate to your own country. I know in Australia, most of the year it's pretty dry for most areas. Queensland's a bit different. And then traveling into Southeast Asian countries such as Singapore, very, very different climates. We got off the plane with a bit of a shock. We knew it was coming. But if you have elements that you feel may react differently, make sure you take the appropriate cautions and preparations to ensure that you still have a good looking pit display when you get off the other side.
Also, pack any screws and nails and fasteners and things in a separate box, or fairly well isolated, because you don't want them getting loose inside your box with the rest of everything else and scratching everything up in transport. Not that happened, but I can see it happening.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of this stuff we mention for a lot of teams may seem like common sense, but it can happen. It happens to the best of us at the best of times. We had minor damage to a few different elements, but just with contingency plans and a bit of creative thinking, such as the nail polish Peter mentioned, you should be able to come back from it.
Yeah, and just doubling down on that point, Corey. We thought we had everything planned out. Nothing would go wrong, especially with the triple-walled boxes. We thought, nothing's going to be able to, damage our stuff. But we were wrong. So yeah, definitely make sure you have all your planning put in place.
Corrugated cardboard is mostly air, so I mean, it's even triple walled. You still get enough force that's easily going through.
Okay.
Great.
And yes, one final note on that is, and again, this may seem like common sense, but it does happen. Don't put your cars or important project elements in with your pit display with international shipping. Make sure they're on with your personal carry-on in either your suitcase, or in our case, I literally took the cars in my backpack on the plane, the 2 race cars, to make sure that they got there. Make sure it's with you. It's as safe as possible.
And don't check your cars into checked-in baggage either. There has been a story of one team who checked their cars in, went in international on an international flight, and because of the temperature change in the cargo hold, or pressure change, I'm not sure exactly what it was. Some combination of pressure,
it's the humidity and the
probably.
pressure.
Yeah, it was because of the cargo hold. Their cars swelled up. Their paint was ruined. They had to re-sand them back and everything.
Oh no!
Nice.
Yeah, I think
team
it was
was that?
A1 Racing, but don't quote me on it.
Wait, was it A1? Because I saw their cars at Nationals and they were pretty.
Yeah,
they were nice cars.
Yeah.
That's the gold
sure.
one, Matthew.
I'm not sure. It was around that era though.
Because they didn't either paint. I don't know. I just wanted to flex I've touched that A1 car.
Okay, and the next topic of consideration is the ease of assembly and we stress the and, disassembly. So obviously you've got to be able to easily and efficiently assemble your booth at competition events within, say for example, the 2-hour time limits. You do not want to be impeding on that. There are point penalties involved, and it's I can imagine it could be quite embarrassing when all the other teams are finished and you're having to stay there after hours under the judges' strict supervision with their stopwatches and seeing how many points they can strip from you. So, Peter, I believe you mentioned this earlier, labeling your components so that you know exactly what goes with what.
Correct. Yeah, we had all of our pit display components labelled, or definitely the tubing elements because they're so similar. So we had them all labelled up, and we also produced a assembly guide for our pit display, which was very helpful, especially in case like a team member dropped out or someone had to take on another team member's responsibilities for the pit display setup. That was quite useful. But definitely rehearse your pit display setup before you ship it, because those 2 hours you think geez, that's 120 minutes, but it just flies by. So make sure you rehearse your pit display setup, and also factor in the amount of time it takes to unpack your pit display, because if you have lots of bubble wrap, it does not, it's not very quick to disassemble bubble wrap or to take your components out of bubble wrap. It can take half an hour or more, so factor that into your timing.
And don't put your first pieces at the bottom of your box, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think also at the World Finals we found that it was a sort of a rummage again between everyone to sort of unpack all of their pit displays within this sort of tight confines of the area we're in, and there was bubble wrap everywhere, and it was just you're trying to tidy up, but then you're not sure whether you're tidying up your stuff or someone else's stuff. So that does just slow you down. So you need to be prepared for that. I almost think you should sort of be able to put your pit display up in about an hour to know that, comfortably, to know that you can put it up in 2 hours of competition.
One tip I'd add to that, because everyone's got, boxes everywhere and stuff, make sure you, label your boxes or put, your logo on your boxes to make sure that you can track, right, this is our team's boxes, this is our packaging, so that, another team doesn't get their hands on it and then you start losing, well, where's our bubble wrap? Where's our boxes? That's one kind of tip I'd have.
And a tip from me, make sure you take extras of small pieces. I'm talking screws, brackets, whatever it be, because no one wants to lose one screw and that be the end of their booth, because that'd be embarrassing.
It'll be fine.
Or take the Ascension approach, zip ties. Just zip tie the whole pit display together. Trust me, it works. It was a nightmare, but it works.
Just don't lean on it too hard.
I'm just...
Hey, I was leaning on that thing the whole competition.
And on that two-way approach with all the packaging being everywhere, either make sure you bring enough to repackage all of your components for shipping back home, or have contingencies in place. I know we were able to source a nice big roll of bubble wrap in Singapore so that all of our stuff wasn't completely destroyed from us having to tear all our bubble wrap open for pit assembly, but then having nowhere near enough to repack it properly for the trip home.
Another box is always handy because somehow it never seems to fit the same way it did.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
But then you got to ship another box.
George, I believe also you had a bit of an interesting time having to reassemble your pit display, not once, not twice, but 3 times, as far as I'm aware, at your World Finals. Want to talk about that?
Yeah, it was interesting because at our World Finals, the award ceremony were held on the Yas Marina circuit, which was amazing, but it did mean that they got 3 teams to move their disassemble their pit displays at the competition and then move them to the circuit for sort of the judges and the VIP guests to sort of look at as they went round speaking to teams. And so there were 3 teams that had to disassemble their pit display, which was interesting putting up our pit display at sort of midday in the Arabian sun. That was a lovely experience. And so, the first point is make sure your pit display can withstand being taken down and being put back up again. It's not going to break. But then also after the award ceremony, we just won and went in some sort of emotional daze, and then Mark or Nelson or Dave came over and were just like, okay, now you've got to take Pit Display down again and move it 300 meters over there to the paddock. So I think to about midnight or something, we were moving our Pit Display again. And I mean, it was a bit easier because we didn't have to pack it all down. We could carry it in big parts across the circuit. But do make sure that your Pit Display can be moved. I think we definitely really liked going with the cardboard approach. But by the time it was in the paddock, there were bits where sort of on the corners are being a bit bashed, being moved around, and didn't look as good as it did at the competition.
Yeah, and we should just note that this is now covered C6.6.8 in your competition regulations. Clearly, we haven't had this year's comp regs, have we yet? I don't think they've come out.
No.
We haven't had them yet.
Okay. No, but most likely be seeing something along the lines of that potentially, depending on, I guess, the venue, if it's virtual or not. So C6.6.8, the pit display should be designed in such a way that it can be dismantled and rebuilt in a different location during or after the event. This is to allow pit displays to be rebuilt for promotional purposes in strategic locations over the Grand Prix weekend. Sustainability, it's a word thrown around by a lot of teams and often in quite questionable senses. And as far as in my time, I've seen sort of 2 or 3 different ways that teams approaches this. So I know we use this rather ambiguous term of reusability. So taking the line that after this event, this pit can be taken back to our school. You can strip the vinyl off, and any team can repurpose it for their own branding. Did anyone else take a similar approach to this, or in a contrasting ways?
I think we might have as well used that as part of our whole sustainability part of the Invisity brand. Might have said, and I think we even did reuse parts of that from the Revolution Racing pit display, from memory. I'm not actually sure. So,
I believe so.
There's that, and we also had the whole carbon neutral approach to our brand, where we planted trees and that kind of thing, and use sustainable materials for things like business cards where possible.
Matt, how did you calculate your carbon emissions for the pit display design construction?
We didn't exactly, but I do think that is another thing that teams can do as part of sustainability. Is there are many services out there that you can go to, pay them not too much money, and they have tools on their website. You can calculate your carbon emissions based on what you've done, and they will fund towards projects to offset that and make your things done, make what you've done carbon neutral. Now, it does seem a bit like a cop-out, but it does actually have real impact on the world, because you are paying for projects that make them carbon neutral or even carbon positive, depending on how much you pay.
Are you saying that we can be a carbon positive team?
Carbon negative?
I think carbon negatives.
I think it's carbon negative, but it has a positive
I certainly
negative.
don't think it's carbon positive.
Yes, carbon negative, sorry.
You've just done a chump there. You've just done, I've tested negative in the positive sense. So I was positively negative.
Oh, God. No, you pay money to just get power stations built.
You fund the offshore mining
Offshore
of oil. We will personally wrap a plastic garbage bag around a turtle's throat if you pay us money.
Oh,
carbon positive.
Christ. Oh, enjoy that one, Michael.
Yeah, keep that in, Michael.
Okay. And just to recap on that, so the reusability stance taken by teams, so the idea that this pit will be reused either as an entirety or in components, as Matt mentioned, by future teams, or do you take the carbon neutral approach, which we've seen teams such as Zero Friction and Infinitude take in the past, which, as far as in my experience at least, 2018 Worlds, that seemed to go down a lot better with the judges than the reusability stance. Reusability for us was a bit of a cop-out, but...
Just a question for everyone. What are your pit displays doing now?
I don't want to talk about it.
I'll start. I'll start. The Infinitude pit display is just set up at school in a corner. But we didn't really have a plan for what we were going to do after the competition. But that was at a time where we didn't have any of the sustainability criteria, so we didn't need to think about that. But yeah, it was kind of like, oh, what are we going to do with it? So we just chucked it in the corner, and it's still there to this date, 4 years later. So yeah. Corey, what's happening with the IOTA display?
As far as I'm aware, I don't actually think it got unboxed from Worlds. I think it just put in. Oh, actually, no. Sorry, I lied. We assembled it for the whole school to see, and we had special guests in, and they all saw it, and it went down really well. And then it got packed up, and it has not seen the light of day since, which is a shame. But at the same time, without sufficient space to properly display it, the reality of it is a lot of these are going to go into storage, if not just be thrown out eventually.
Matt, do you know what's happening with the Invisity display?
I have actually
it's in
no
Liam's
idea
shed.
where it is.
It's in Liam's shed.
Oh, it's in Liam's shed, is it? Okay, I was going to say, yeah.
Because...
I'm guessing it's... I wasn't sure if Liam wasn't able to get it and it got thrown out.
No, Bassett wanted it gone. And he was like, hey, Liam, can you come take this?
Right.
So Liam pulled up one day and put the Invisity pit display in his shed.
George, where's the Evolve pit display living these days?
We put it up for a sponsors event, and then I think basically it just became the art department's cardboard stockpile. Or actually, I think because it was sort of by the time that we put up for the sponsors, it was beginning to look a bit ropey. Oh, and we left it out in school for a couple of weeks, and sort of people
sustainability.
Touched it, there you
go.
Yeah. I mean, the main idea with sustainability with ours was that it was cardboard, so it could have been it could be recycled. I mean, it did get reused in that. It's now people's art projects and stuff, but sure, that's a good use for it. So, yeah.
Yeah, I must admit,
this is all a little bit depressing, but
yeah. In hindsight, I think
it's also what your intentions were. So,
yeah.
What
with the whole sustainability thing, right?
So. The Ascension Pit Display, we figured out they would actually be cheaper to get the entire thing reprinted instead of getting it shipped back to Australia. So, our pit display, the real pit display, is in Abu Dhabi, and our sustainability was sold as this can be reused, and we just left it in a trash can in Abu Dhabi somewhere.
Oh, no. Wow. Oh.
That's not sustainable.
Wow.
This is what not to do.
Actually, if
that's
you
about
think
as
about
capitalistic as it comes.
If you think
it's
about
economically
it,
sustainable.
The amount of fuel that would have been burnt shipping it back might actually be less sustainable than just chucking it out.
That's a good point. Yeah.
So if you want to be truly sustainable, swim.
Oh.
I know there was another team at our World Finals that bought a TV in Abu Dhabi, so they didn't want to ship it over with them, and then just left the TV there.
We did that too.
Oh wow!
But you just did that with everything.
We did that with the pit display. And a TV as well.
We considered buying TVs in Malaysia and then just returning them. But we didn't do that. We just shipped over ones we had. But yeah.
One of our TVs broke, to be fair, so There is an Ascension monitor over there, but it's smashed, so that's fine. It's not as bad as the actual pit display where it was usable.
Yeah, in hindsight, I must admit, having a pit display that was firstly maybe produced by using recycled components, but then I think more importantly, recyclable components. So components that post-event can do more than sit in a back closet or be thrown out, actually having them so that they can be taken to, for an example in Australia, a registered recycling plant and be turned into whatever it may be. Yeah, I think that
Can
is...
you get your 10 cents from a pit display?
I'd hope you'd be probably getting a bit more than 10 cents, especially if you're using the scrap aluminium. But yes, I think if you are really truly wanting to address the sustainability criteria, I think that is one of, if not the only way to best get those marks and actually have a pit display that doesn't end up in a bin.
Do we need to explain that joke, or I reckon we just leave it there?
What was the joke?
The
How
10
you
cent.
get your 10 cents.
It's only in a couple states in Australia.
Oh, do you guys not have that?
It's only New South Wales and South Australia that has it.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. But it
Is
still
it
says
still
it
on
on the
the-
can.
Yeah,
it's
that's
still
what
on the
I'm
cans everywhere else, but it says New South Wales and South Australia. Basically, if you take your cans back to a recycling centre in New South Wales or South Australia, like, you know, drink cans, soft drink, that kind of thing, you get 10 cents per can.
Yeah, like for our Woolworths has this big box that you just feed the cans into, and it eventually gives you a receipt which you
Yeah.
can cash at the checkout.
I got $50 from one of those once.
What that's a big night,
Jesus,
Ben.
how many cans did you have?
That's a lot.
Well, what we do is we save them up, and like once every 4 months or something, we'll be like, oh, do we want to go this now? And we'll be like, oh, fine, whatever.
But that's still a lot of cans. That's
It's 5,000,
500.
isn't it?
500.
Yeah, 500, sorry, yeah.
500. That's
I
still
can't
500.
count, so.
Still, 500. You've got 500 cans.
Just sitting around.
Yep.
How do you even transport 500 cans? Because you can't
Yeah.
just squish them, can you? You gotta.
We've got a
have
van.
them- What? You got a
We've
van?
got a van.
Oh my god! You got a van for cans.
It's a van canned van. No, it's for my dad's
Anyway,
business. And
this
it's
is.
our can transport.
Let's just finish
Yeah,
the
okay.
episode.
Yeah.
Not make Michael's life a
It's a
complete
transporter.
disaster.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for listening to this episode of Off the Track. If you enjoyed the episode, you can rate the show on Apple Podcasts. And of course, as always, make sure to follow us on Instagram at Off the Track Podcast and visit us at offthetrack.net. From all of us here at Off the Track, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
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 Bye.